r/pettyrevenge my FIL evicted me, so I got him kicked out of his own house. The eviction notice was taped to our front door like a scarlet letter, fluttering in the morning breeze as I waddled up the porch steps with my grocery bags. 28 weeks pregnant, exhausted from a double shift at the hospital, and now this. 30 days to vacate the premises. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys, the paper crumpling in my grip. Inside, I could hear my husband Jake's muffled voice on a work call from his home office. We'd been living in his father's rental house for 2 years, never missing a payment, never causing problems. Hell, we'd even fixed the broken porch railing with our own money last month. Jake. I called out, my voice cracking. Jake. The office door flew open and he emerged, headset still around his neck, face shifting from annoyance to alarm when he saw my expression. I thrust the notice at him wordlessly. His face went white as he read. This has to be a mistake. Dad wouldn't. Call him, I said, sinking onto our second-hand couch, one hand instinctively moving to my belly. Call him right now. Jake's conversation with his father lasted exactly 4 minutes. I watched my husband's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally defeated acceptance. When he hung up, he couldn't meet my eyes. He says he needs the house back for family reasons, Jake said quietly. Something about his brother needing a place to stay. His brother lives in Phoenix, I said flatly. Has for 15 years. Jake ran his hands through his hair. I know. I told him that. He got defensive and hung up on me. That evening, while Jake stress cleaned the entire kitchen for the 3rd time, I did what any rational pregnant woman facing homelessness would do. I went down a rabbit hole on rental websites. And there it was, listed on 3 different platforms with photos I recognized all too well. Beautiful 3BR/2BA family home, completely renovated, $2,800 per month. We'd been paying $1,400. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Our kitchen. Our living room where we painted the walls sage green because I was nesting. Our bedroom where we'd assembled the crib that now sat half-finished in the corner. All of it photographed and marketed like we'd never existed. Jake, I called out, my voice eerily calm. Come look at this. He appeared behind me, dish towel still in his hands, and I heard the exact moment his heart broke. A sharp intake of breath, followed by silence so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. He lied, Jake whispered. Dad lied right to my face. I clicked through the photos methodically. There was the bathroom where Jake had spent a weekend recocking the shower. The kitchen where I'd scrubbed years of grease off the cabinets when we first moved in. The backyard where we planned to teach our daughter to ride a bike someday. All of it now listed as move-in ready for someone willing to pay double. We trusted him, I said, my voice hollow. We trusted family. Jake slumped against the wall. What are we going to do? Everything in our price range has a waiting list, and with a baby coming. I closed the laptop and looked at my husband, really looked at him. The defeat in his shoulders, the betrayal in his eyes. This man who'd never said a bad word about his father, who defended him even when I pointed out his cheapskate tendencies and casual cruelty. Something cold and determined settled in my chest. We're going to figure it out, I said. But first, I'm going to make some phone calls. The next morning brought a fresh wave of humiliation. I'd spent the night making lists, rental applications we needed to complete, deposits we'd have to scrape together, the logistics of moving while 8 months pregnant. But when I called the first apartment complex on my list, reality hit like a freight train. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we require income that's 3 times the monthly rent, the leasing agent said in a tone that suggested she'd delivered this news 1,000 times before. And with current availability, you're looking at a 6-week wait minimum. 6 weeks. Our baby was due in 12. I hung up and immediately dialed the next number. Same story. Then the next. By the 4th call, I was crying into the phone, begging a stranger to understand that we weren't deadbeats, that we'd never been late on rent, that I just needed somewhere safe to bring my daughter home. I understand your situation, the woman said, not unkindly, but policy is policy. Jake found me an hour later, slumped at the kitchen table with my phone dead beside me and a notebook full of crossed-out addresses. Any luck? He asked, though my face probably told him everything. We're screwed, I said bluntly. Everything decent is either too expensive or has a waiting list longer than my pregnancy. The places we can afford. I gestured at the laptop screen showing a basement apartment with water stains on the ceiling and bars on the windows. Look at this. The ad actually says some moisture issues and street noise. Jake sat down heavily across from me. Maybe we could ask my mom. Your mother lives in a 1-bedroom senior community, I cut him off. Where exactly would we put a nursery? The closet? My sister then, or Jake. I reached across the table and grabbed his hand. Your family made their position clear when your father decided to throw us out for money. We're on our own. That afternoon, Jake had to go into the office for a client meeting he couldn't reschedule. I found myself alone in the house that was no longer ours, surrounded by boxes we'd optimistically started packing. The nursery door stood open, revealing the half-assembled crib and bags of tiny clothes I'd been washing and folding with such excitement just days before. I was supposed to be resting. Doctor's orders, after my blood pressure had spiked at my last appointment. Instead, I was Googling tenant rights and illegal eviction with the desperate energy of someone who'd run out of options. That's when I found the City Housing Department's website. I'd never paid much attention to the bureaucratic side of renting before. Why would I? We paid our rent, Frank cashed the checks, everyone was happy. But now, scrolling through pages about landlord obligations and property codes, I started to notice things. Like how we'd never received a copy of our lease after the first year. How Frank had always insisted on cash payments, no checks. How he'd brushed off our requests for receipts with jokes about keeping things simple. I walked through the house with new eyes, my phone's camera app open. The bathroom window that never quite closed, letting in drafts and moisture. The electrical outlet in the kitchen that sparked sometimes. The basement door that Frank had told us to keep locked because the stairs were a little wobbly. When had I started accepting these things as normal? When had good enough become good enough for my family? My phone buzzed with a text from Jake, meeting running late. Any progress on apartments? I typed back, working on it. But I wasn't looking at rental listings anymore. I was looking at the city inspector's contact information, and for the first time in days, I smiled. By Friday, desperation had taken on a taste, metallic and bitter, coating my tongue every morning when I woke up. We'd managed to schedule 3 apartment viewings, but each one felt like a cruel joke. The first place reeked of cigarette smoke so strong it made me gag, and when I asked about it, the landlord shrugged and said the previous tenant smoked a little. The second had a kitchen so small I couldn't open the refrigerator and oven at the same time. The third looked promising until we discovered the laundry room was actually a closet with hookups that may or may not work, for an extra $200 a month. We could make it work, Jake said half-heartedly as we sat in our car outside the last apartment. The smoke smell might fade if we aired it out. I stared at him. Jake, I'm pregnant. Secondhand smoke residue isn't something that just airs out. Do you want our daughter breathing that? He slumped against the steering wheel. No. God, no. We're running out of time. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every position was uncomfortable, the baby seemed to be doing gymnastics, and my mind kept cycling through worst-case scenarios. What if we ended up in some weekly motel? What if I went into early labor while we were homeless? What if Child Protective Services decided we were unfit parents before our daughter even took her first breath? At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and padded to the kitchen for water. The house felt different in the dark, no longer like home, but like a museum of our former life. I'd started seeing everything as if through glass, things we'd once belonged to but could no longer touch. That's when I heard it. A car door slamming outside, followed by voices. I peeked through the blinds and my blood turned to ice. Frank stood on our front lawn with a man I didn't recognize, both of them gesturing at the house. Frank was holding a flashlight and pointing at different windows, talking animatedly. The stranger had a clipboard and was nodding, occasionally writing something down. I crept closer to the window, straining to hear. Fragments of conversation drifted up. Fresh paint will brighten it right up. Market rate for this neighborhood. Current tenants out by the 15th. The 15th. That was 2 weeks earlier than our eviction notice stated. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, trying to record them, but the angle was wrong and the audio too muffled. By the time I'd positioned myself better, they were walking back toward Frank's truck. But I'd heard enough. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, my mind churning. Frank wasn't just evicting us for more money, he was already showing the place to new tenants, probably promising them an earlier move-in date than he'd legally given us. What else was he lying about? The next morning, Jake left early for another apartment hunt in a neighborhood 40 minutes from his office. I told him I was too tired to come along, that I'd rest and make some calls from home. The truth was, I had a different kind of appointment. The city housing department occupied the 3rd floor of a beige government building downtown. I'd called ahead and spoken to a woman named Carol Mendez, telling her I had questions about rental properties and tenant rights. She'd squeezed me in for a 10 a.m. consultation. Carol turned out to be a tired-looking woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd heard every sob story in the book. She listened patiently as I explained our situation, occasionally taking notes. So you're saying the landlord never provided updated lease documentation, only accepts cash payments, and is advertising the property before your legal move-out date, she summarized. That's just the beginning, I said, and pulled out my phone to show her the photos I'd been taking all week. Carol's eyebrows climbed higher with each photo I swiped through. The electrical outlet with scorch marks around the edges. The bathroom ceiling with obvious water damage and what looked suspiciously like mold. The basement stairs that were so warped I could see daylight between the boards. When was your last safety inspection? She asked, pen poised over her notepad. I blinked at her. Safety inspection? All rental properties are required to have annual safety inspections. The landlord should have provided you with copies of the certificates. Carol's expression had shifted from sympathetic to professional. Do you have documentation of these repairs you mentioned? The porch railing? We have receipts for the materials, I said slowly, realizing where this was heading. Frank said he'd reimburse us but never did. We wanted it fixed before someone got hurt. And the landlord was aware of these other issues? The electrical problems, the moisture damage? My mind flashed back to conversations I'd rationalized away. Frank's casual "oh, that old thing" when I'd mentioned the sparking outlet. His wave of dismissal when Jake had pointed out the soft spots in the bathroom floor. We told him, but he always said he'd get to it eventually. Carol was writing furiously now. Ms. Rodriguez, I need to ask you something important. Are you familiar with the term habitability standards? I shook my head, though something cold was unfurling in my stomach. It means landlords are legally required to maintain properties in a condition that's safe and sanitary for human habitation. Based on what you're showing me. She gestured at my phone. I'm seeing multiple potential violations. Violations? Electrical hazards, possible mold exposure, structural integrity issues. Carol flipped through several pages in a thick binder. If even half of what you're documenting is confirmed, this property shouldn't have been rented to anyone, let alone a pregnant woman. The room felt suddenly airless. Are you saying we've been living somewhere dangerous? I'm saying I need to schedule an emergency inspection. Carol was already reaching for her phone. How quickly can you document everything you've shown me and email it to this office? I left the housing department with a stack of paperwork and a sick feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. Carol had explained the inspection process, the potential outcomes, the timeline for violations to be addressed. She'd been thorough, professional, and completely matter-of-fact about the possibility that our home of 2 years might be condemned. The inspector can be there as early as Monday, she'd said. But I need to warn you, if the violations are as serious as they appear, you may be required to vacate immediately for safety reasons. So we might be homeless anyway, just for different reasons. On the drive back, I called Jake 3 times before he answered. Please tell me you found something, he said by way of greeting. Because I just looked at a place where the landlord wanted first month, last month, security deposit, and a cleaning fee that would wipe out our entire savings. Jake, I need to tell you something. I pulled into our driveway, Frank's driveway, and sat staring at the house that suddenly looked different. Shabby instead of charming. Neglected instead of quirky. I went to the city housing department today. Silence. Then, you did what? I think we've been living in an illegal rental. I think Frank has been violating housing codes for years, and I think that's why he wants us out before anyone official notices. Jesus Christ, Jake whispered. What does that mean for us? I watched a squirrel run across the power line connected to our house, the same power line that fed electricity to outlets that threw sparks. It means everything just got a lot more complicated. The inspector arrived Monday morning at exactly 9 a.m., driving a white city van that might as well have had "Your landlord is screwed" painted on the side. I watched from the kitchen window as a heavy-set man in a hard hat and reflective vest climbed out, clipboard in hand, official badge glinting in the sunlight. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. How's it going? Can't concentrate at work. I typed back, Inspector just arrived. I'll call you when he's done. What I didn't tell Jake was that Frank was also here. He'd shown up 20 minutes earlier, letting himself in with his spare key like he still had the right. No knock, no warning, just the sound of the front door opening and his voice calling out, "Hello? Anyone home?" I'd found him in the living room, looking around with the nervous energy of a man who suddenly remembered he might have left something incriminating lying around. What are you doing here, Frank? I'd asked, not bothering to hide my hostility. Got a call from some city inspector. Said there was a complaint about the property. His eyes darted around the room, landing on the stack of documentation I'd prepared. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Maybe you should ask yourself why there's something to complain about. Frank's face had flushed red. Now you listen here, young lady. I've been renting properties for 20 years, and I don't need some ungrateful tenant. The doorbell cut him off. The inspector. Now I stood in my kitchen, watching through the window as Frank intercepted the inspector on the front walkway. Even from inside, I could see Frank's animated gesturing, his attempt at good old boy charm. The inspector listened politely, checked something on his clipboard, then pointed firmly toward the house. The front door opened, and I heard Frank's voice, artificially cheerful. Right this way, sir. As you can see, we maintain the property very well. Family home, you know, been in good hands. I walked into the living room as they entered. The inspector was a man in his 60s with steel gray hair and the methodical movements of someone who'd seen every landlord trick in the book. His eyes swept the room professionally, already noting things I'd stopped seeing years ago. You must be Mrs. Rodriguez, he said, extending a hand. I'm Tom Patterson, City Housing Inspector. I understand you filed a complaint regarding habitability concerns? Several concerns, I said, shaking his hand firmly. Frank shifted uncomfortably beside him. Well, let's take a look, shall we? Patterson pulled out a tablet and stylus. I'll need to examine the electrical systems, plumbing, structural elements, and check for any environmental hazards. Environmental hazards? Frank's voice cracked slightly. What kind of environmental hazards? Patterson was already walking toward the kitchen, where the problematic outlet waited like evidence in a crime scene. Mold, lead paint, asbestos, carbon monoxide sources. Standard safety protocol. I followed them, watching Frank's face grow paler with each item on the list. When Patterson crouched down to examine the sparking outlet, Frank actually stepped backward. This outlet shows signs of significant electrical damage, Patterson said, photographing the scorch marks. When did you first notice this issue? We reported it over a year ago, I said before Frank could answer. Along with several other problems. Now, hold on, Frank started. And you addressed these reports how? Patterson asked, not looking up from his tablet. Frank's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Well, you see, electrical work requires permits, and the scheduling. Patterson straightened up, fixing Frank with a stare that could have frozen water. Mr. Rodriguez, are you telling me you've been aware of electrical hazards in an occupied rental property for over a year and failed to address them? That's not, it's complicated. It's actually quite simple, Patterson said, making a note. Let's continue with the inspection. By the time we reached the basement, Frank had gone completely silent. The inspector's flashlight beam revealed things I'd never seen before, or maybe things I'd trained myself not to see. Water stains that suggested serious foundation issues. Electrical wiring that looked older than I was, with frayed connections and jury-rigged extensions that would make any electrician weep. Sweet mother of pearl, Patterson muttered, photographing a junction box that was literally held together with electrical tape. Frank made a choking sound. How long has this property been used as a rental? Patterson asked. About 8 years, Frank stammered. And your last electrical inspection was when? The silence stretched so long I could hear my own heartbeat. Mr. Rodriguez? There might have been some oversight in the paperwork. Patterson looked up from his tablet, and his expression wasn't kind anymore. Sir, are you telling me this property has never been inspected? The words hung in the basement air like a death sentence. Frank's face had gone from pale to gray to an alarming shade of green. I watched him open his mouth twice before any sound came out. There were circumstances. He finally managed. The regulations changed over the years, and with a paperwork backlog at City Hall. Patterson's pen stopped moving. He looked up from his tablet with the expression of a man who'd just discovered something truly spectacular in its awfulness. Mr. Rodriguez, are you operating this rental property without permits? The basement suddenly felt smaller. I found myself holding my breath, watching Frank's face cycle through what looked like the 5 stages of grief in fast forward. No, that's not exactly. Technically speaking. Yes or no, sir? Frank's shoulders sagged. The permits got tied up in red tape. You know how the city is with paperwork. I felt something shift inside me, not the baby, but something deeper. A realization that we hadn't just been living in a substandard house. We'd been living in Frank's little tax evasion scheme, his under-the-table income source that he dressed up as family helping family. Patterson was writing furiously now. How many other rental properties do you operate, Mr. Rodriguez? Just this one, Frank said quickly. Too quickly. And you collect rent how? Checks? Electronic transfer? I watched Frank's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. Cash, mostly. Keeps things simple for everyone. I'm sure it does. Patterson's tone could have etched glass. Mrs. Rodriguez, do you have records of your rental payments? No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Frank always said receipts weren't necessary since we were family. Patterson made another note, and I could practically see Frank's world crumbling in real time. But then something shifted in Frank's demeanor. The panic in his eyes hardened into something uglier. You know what? Frank said, his voice gaining strength. I think we're done here. This is harassment, pure and simple. These are family matters, and I don't appreciate outside interference. Patterson didn't even look up. Sir, this is an official safety inspection. I'm afraid we're done when I say we're done. We'll see about that. Frank pulled out his phone. I'm calling my son. Jake needs to know what his wife has been up to behind his back. My stomach dropped. I'd been dreading this moment, when Frank would force Jake to choose sides. When family loyalty would go up against what was right. Frank, don't. Jake? Yeah, it's Dad. You need to come home right now. Your wife has called the city on us. Some inspector is here threatening to shut down the house. Frank's eyes never left mine as he spoke. Yeah, I know. I couldn't believe it either. Patterson finished photographing the electrical box and stood up. Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm going to need you and your husband to be present for the rest of this inspection. There are some findings that require immediate tenant notification. What kind of findings? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. The kind that typically require emergency relocation. Frank ended his call with a sharp jab at his phone. Jake's on his way. And when he gets here, we're going to have a family discussion about loyalty and gratitude. Mr. Rodriguez, Patterson interjected, I need to inform you that based on my preliminary findings, this property is in violation of multiple housing safety codes. You'll be receiving a formal notice within 48 hours. And then what? I asked. Patterson's expression was grim. Then you have 30 days to make necessary repairs or face condemnation proceedings. Frank laughed, but it sounded hysterical. 30 days? Do you have any idea how much electrical work costs? Plumbing? Foundation repair? That's not my concern, sir. My concern is tenant safety. Well, the tenants won't be my concern much longer anyway, Frank snapped. They're out in 3 weeks regardless. Patterson looked between us, and I saw the moment he realized this wasn't just about housing violations. This was about revenge, greed, and a family destroying itself from the inside. Actually, Mr. Rodriguez, Patterson said carefully, if this property is condemned, any existing eviction notices become void. Tenants can't be held responsible for rent on uninhabitable housing. Frank's face went white. And that's when we heard Jake's car pull into the driveway. I heard Jake's footsteps on the porch, his key in the lock, and then his voice calling out with an edge I'd never heard before. What the hell is going on here? He appeared at the top of the basement stairs, still in his work clothes, his face flushed from rushing home. His eyes moved between me, Frank, and Patterson, trying to piece together a situation that probably looked like his worst nightmare. Jake, thank God you're here, Frank said, immediately switching to his wounded patriarch voice. Your wife has completely lost her mind. She's called the city to harass us over normal wear and tear. Normal wear and tear? Patterson interjected, gesturing at the electrical disaster behind him. Sir, this wiring is a fire hazard that could have killed your family in their sleep. Jake's face went slack. What? The outlet upstairs that sparks, I said quietly. The one we told your father about. It's connected to this. I pointed at the jury-rigged electrical box that looked like a bomb waiting to go off. Jake stared at the wiring, and I watched understanding dawn in his eyes. Dad, how long have you known about this? It's not as bad as it looks, Frank said quickly. These government types, they blow everything out of proportion. A little electrical tape, some basic maintenance. Mr. Rodriguez, Patterson cut him off, this property has never been properly permitted for rental use. The electrical system hasn't been updated since the 1970s. The basement shows signs of significant water damage and possible structural compromise. He scrolled through his tablet. I'm also seeing what appears to be mold growth in multiple areas. Jake's voice was barely a whisper. Mold? She's pregnant. Now hold on, Frank's voice rose defensively. I've been maintaining this house for 8 years. Never had a single complaint until Miss Entitled here decided she wasn't grateful enough for below-market rent. Below market? I felt my temper finally snap. You're about to charge the next tenants double. And apparently, you've been collecting cash rent on an illegal property this whole time. That's enough. Frank shouted, his mask finally slipping completely. I don't have to stand here and listen to this from some ungrateful little. Dad. Jake's voice cut through the basement like a blade. Stop talking. Right now. The authority in his tone surprised everyone, including me. Jake descended the remaining stairs and walked over to examine the electrical box himself, his face growing darker with each detail he took in. Jesus Christ, Dad. This could have electrocuted us. The whole house could have caught fire. You're being dramatic. Am I? Jake wheeled around to face his father. Is the inspector being dramatic too? Are the city housing codes just suggestions? Frank's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Patterson cleared his throat. I need to finish my inspection upstairs. Mrs. Rodriguez, I strongly recommend you and your husband consider temporary relocation until these issues are resolved. As we climbed the basement stairs, I could hear Frank muttering behind us, his voice taking on a desperate edge. This is ridiculous. 20 years I've been doing this. 20 years without problems. Without problems you knew about, Patterson corrected. There's a difference. In the living room, Patterson methodically documented every issue I'd shown him and several I'd never noticed. The water stains on the ceiling weren't just cosmetic, they indicated roof damage that could lead to collapse. The soft spots in the bathroom floor suggested the subfloor was rotting. Even the windows were wrong, single-pane glass that violated energy efficiency requirements for rentals. How is this possible? Jake asked, running his hands through his hair. How do you rent a house for 8 years without anyone catching this? Easily, Patterson said grimly. When you don't pull permits, don't schedule inspections, and only deal in cash, you can fly under the radar indefinitely. Until someone files a complaint. Frank, who'd been growing increasingly agitated, suddenly exploded. You want to know how this is possible? Because I was trying to help my son. Below market rent, no credit checks, no background investigation. I was being generous, and this is how you repay me? Jake stared at his father. Generous? Dad, you were going to double the rent and kick us out. Business is business, Jake. You can't expect charity forever. Charity? My voice came out sharper than intended. We've been paying you $1,400 a month to live in a house that should be condemned. Patterson looked up from his tablet. Speaking of which, I need to inform you both that based on my findings, I'll be recommending immediate habitability action. This property cannot continue to be occupied in its current condition. The room went silent except for the sound of Frank's increasingly labored breathing. What does that mean exactly? Jake asked. It means, Patterson said carefully, that you have 72 hours to vacate before this house is officially condemned. The words 72 hours echoed in the sudden silence like a death sentence. I felt the baby kick hard against my ribs, as if she could sense the panic radiating through my body. 72 hours? Jake's voice cracked. But we haven't found anywhere to go yet. She's 8 months pregnant. Patterson's expression softened slightly. I understand this is difficult timing, but I can't in good conscience allow anyone to continue living here. The electrical hazards alone, if that wiring sparked the wrong way, you could have a house fire in minutes. Frank had gone completely pale, gripping the back of our couch like it was the only thing keeping him upright. This is insane. You can't just throw people out of their homes over some paperwork technicalities. These aren't technicalities, Mr. Rodriguez. Patterson's patience was clearly wearing thin. These are serious safety violations that put lives at risk. And frankly, the fact that you've been collecting rent on this property without proper permits is fraud. The word fraud hung in the air like a physical presence. I watched Jake's face as the full scope of his father's deception sank in. We hadn't just been living in a substandard house, we'd been unwitting participants in an illegal scheme. Dad, Jake said slowly, please tell me you've been reporting the rental income on your taxes. Frank's silence was answer enough. Oh my God. Jake sank into the armchair, his head in his hands. Dad, what have you done? I was trying to make ends meet. Frank exploded. You think it's easy living on Social Security? This house was supposed to be my retirement plan. Your retirement plan was illegal. Jake shot back. And you put us in danger for years. Patterson was still writing, documenting everything. Mr. Rodriguez, I have to ask, are there other tenants you should be notifying? Other properties that might have similar issues? I told you, this is the only one, Frank snapped, but something in his tone made me suspicious. What about the duplex on Maple Street? I asked suddenly, remembering a conversation from months ago. You mentioned having to fix a water heater for other tenants. Frank's face went gray. That's different. That's not the same situation. Patterson was looking between us with the expression of a man watching a train wreck unfold. How many rental properties do you actually operate, Mr. Rodriguez? I want to speak to a lawyer, Frank said abruptly. I don't have to answer any more questions. You're absolutely right, Patterson agreed. But I do need to inform you that all suspected violations will be reported to the appropriate departments. That includes not just housing code enforcement, but potentially tax authorities and the district attorney's office if fraud charges seem warranted. Frank made a choking sound and stumbled toward the door. I need air. I can't. This is insane. Dad, wait, Jake started to follow him, but I grabbed his arm. Let him go, I said quietly. We have bigger problems right now. Patterson finished his documentation and handed Jake a thick stack of papers. This is your copy of the inspection report and a summary of violations found. You'll also find information about emergency housing assistance and tenant rights resources. Emergency housing assistance? Jake flipped through the papers with growing desperation. What kind of assistance? There are some programs for displaced tenants, especially in cases involving pregnant women. Though I have to warn you, the waiting lists are long and the requirements strict. After Patterson left, Jake and I sat in our condemned living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the wreckage of our trust and family. The house felt different now, not like a home but like a crime scene. I can't believe he knew, Jake said for the 5th time. All those times you asked about the outlet, about the soft floor in the bathroom. He knew it was dangerous and he just ignored it. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. How's the apartment hunting going? I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to explain that we'd gone from evicted to homeless to refugees in the span of a week. Jake, I said slowly, we need to call everyone we know. Tonight. The next 6 hours were a masterclass in humiliation. Jake and I sat at our kitchen table with our phones, calling every friend, relative, and distant acquaintance who might have a couch we could borrow. The conversations followed a depressing pattern, initial concern, growing awkwardness when we explained the timeline, then polite excuses wrapped in genuine sympathy. I wish we could help, but with Mom staying with us after her surgery. Our lease actually has a clause about extended guests. The baby's room is full of boxes from our move. By 9 p.m., we'd exhausted our contact lists and made exactly zero progress. Jake's sister offered to let us store some belongings in her garage, which felt less like help and more like preparation for homelessness. My parents, bless them, would have taken us in immediately if they hadn't been living in a retirement community in Florida with strict visitor policies. There has to be something, Jake said, scrolling through rental websites with increasing desperation. Short-term furnished places, extended stay hotels, anything. I watched him typing frantically, his optimism growing more forced with each search. The reality was settling into my bones like cold. We were about to be homeless with a baby due in 4 weeks. Jake, look at me, I said finally. Really look. He glanced up from his laptop, his eyes red-rimmed from staring at screens. The cheapest extended stay place is $89 a night. That's almost $3,000 a month, assuming they even allow long-term stays. We don't have that kind of money. So what are you saying? His voice cracked. That we just give up? Before I could answer, headlights swept across our living room window. A car door slammed, followed by the sound of someone stomping up our front steps. Jake and I exchanged glances. We both knew that particular angry gait. Frank didn't knock. He used his key again, barging in like he still owned the place. Which, legally, he did for another 68 hours. We need to talk, he announced, his face flushed and his breath smelling like beer. Family meeting. Right now. Dad, you've been drinking, Jake said carefully. Maybe we should do this tomorrow when? Tomorrow? Frank laughed bitterly. Tomorrow you'll still be living in my condemned house, costing me thousands of dollars in repairs I can't afford. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What are you talking about? Frank pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, clearly a printout from some contractor website. Do you have any idea what it costs to rewire a house? $12,000 to $15,000. Minimum. That's before we even talk about the plumbing, the roof, the foundation work. Jake's face went pale. Dad, that's not our problem. You're the one who let it get this bad. My problem? Frank's voice rose to a shout. Your wife is the one who called the inspector. Your wife destroyed my rental income and probably got me investigated by the IRS. How is that not your problem? The baby kicked hard against my ribs, responding to my spike in adrenaline. Frank, lower your voice. This isn't good for. Oh, now you're worried about what's good for the baby? He whirled toward me, his eyes wild. Where was that concern when you decided to destroy our family? I didn't destroy anything, I shot back, my own voice rising. I reported unsafe living conditions. You know what destroys families? Lying. Fraud. Putting your pregnant daughter-in-law at risk for money. Frank's face twisted into something ugly. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I've done for you. Jake was on his feet so fast his chair toppled backward. Don't you ever speak to my wife like that again. Or what? Frank sneered. You'll call the city on me too? Maybe get me arrested while you're at it? The threat hung in the air between them. I realized with growing horror that Frank wasn't just angry, he was panicked. A man watching his whole illegal operation crumble and looking for someone to blame. Dad, Jake said carefully, you need to leave. Now. Come back tomorrow when you're sober and we can figure this out like adults. Figure it out? Frank laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, I've already figured it out. You want to play hardball? Fine. I want you out of my house tonight. The inspector said 72 hours. The inspector doesn't pay my mortgage, Frank snarled. I do. And I'm telling you to get out. Now. My phone was already in my hand, finger hovering over 911. Frank saw the gesture and his expression shifted into something that made my skin crawl. Go ahead and call the cops, he said. But remember, I'm the legal owner of this property. And you're trespassers. The standoff lasted exactly 37 seconds before Jake broke. Dad, please, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's 8 months pregnant. It's almost midnight. Where are we supposed to go? Frank's expression flickered. For just a moment, I saw the grandfather-to-be underneath the desperate, cornered man. But then his jaw hardened again. You should have thought about that before you decided to bite the hand that feeds you. I struggled to my feet, every muscle in my body screaming. The baby was pressing against my lungs, making it hard to breathe, but adrenaline kept me upright. Fine. We'll leave. But I wanted in writing that you're forcing us out illegally. Illegally? Frank barked out a laugh. Rich, coming from someone who just cost me my livelihood. Your illegal livelihood, I shot back. Built on fraud and putting tenants at risk. Frank's face went purple. You sanctimonious little. Enough. Jake's roar cut through the room like a physical force. Both Frank and I froze. Both of you, just stop. Jake looked between us, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen before. When he spoke again, his voice was eerily calm. Dad, you're absolutely right. This is your house, and if you want us gone, we'll go. He turned to me, and something in his eyes made my heart skip. But you need to understand something. When we walk out that door, we're not just leaving your property. We're leaving your family. Frank's bluster faltered. Jake, don't be dramatic. Dramatic? Jake's voice remained level, which somehow made it more terrifying than shouting. Dad, my wife reported legitimate safety violations because our child was at risk. Instead of taking responsibility, you're throwing us onto the street at midnight. So tell me, what exactly are we walking away from here? What family? I watched Frank's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. Son, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly. Jake pulled out his phone. I'm calling Mom right now. I'm going to tell her exactly why her granddaughter will be born in a homeless shelter instead of the nursery we set up in your illegal rental property. Don't you dare bring your mother into this, Frank snapped, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Why not? Jake was already dialing. She should know what kind of man she married. What kind of grandfather her granddaughter is getting. Frank lunged forward and grabbed Jake's wrist. Put the phone down. Get your hands off me, Jake said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. For a moment, I thought Frank might actually hit his own son. The tension in the room was so thick I could barely breathe. Then my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID made my heart stop. Carol Mendez, City Housing. It's the housing department, I said, staring at the screen. At midnight. All three of us froze. Frank's grip on Jake's wrist loosened. Answer it, Jake said. Mrs. Rodriguez? Carol's voice was tense. I'm sorry to call so late, but we have an emergency situation. The inspector filed his report an hour ago, and there's been a development. What kind of development? We ran the property address through our database, and it's flagged in an ongoing fraud investigation. Federal agents will be executing a search warrant tomorrow morning. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Frank had gone completely white. Federal agents? Carol's voice continued from the speaker on the floor. Mrs. Rodriguez? Are you there? You and your husband need to evacuate immediately and preserve any documentation of your tenancy. This is now a crime scene. The silence that followed Carol's words was deafening. Frank stood frozen in our living room, his face cycling through shades of gray as the implications sank in. Federal agents. Search warrant. Crime scene. Mrs. Rodriguez? Carol's voice crackled from my phone on the floor. I need confirmation that you understand the situation. I bent awkwardly to retrieve the phone, my pregnant belly making this simple motion feel impossible. I'm here. You said federal agents? The property address matched an ongoing IRS investigation into unreported rental income. When our inspector's report flagged multiple code violations and unpermitted rentals, it triggered an automatic referral. Carol's voice was professionally calm, but I could hear the underlying urgency. You have until 6 a.m. to remove any personal belongings and documentation. Frank made a choking sound and stumbled toward the door. Dad, where are you going? Jake called after him. I need air, Frank gasped. This can't be happening. This can't be real. The front door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Through the blinds, I watched him pace frantically across the front lawn, phone pressed to his ear. Probably calling his lawyer, assuming he had one. Ma'am? Carol was still on the line. Are you in a safe location to relocate tonight? Jake and I looked at each other. The honest answer was no. We had nowhere to go, no money for a hotel, and a list of friends who'd already politely declined to help. We're working on it, I lied. I understand this is overwhelming, but you cannot be on the premises when the agents arrive. For your own legal protection. Carol paused. There are emergency shelters, though I know that's not ideal for someone in your condition. A homeless shelter. At 8 months pregnant. The thought made my chest tighten with panic. How much trouble is my father-in-law in? Jake asked, taking the phone from me. That's not for me to say, but unreported rental income, operating without permits, and endangering tenants, these aren't minor violations. Carol's tone suggested Frank was facing something much worse than fines. After ending the call, Jake and I stood in our condemned, soon-to-be-raided living room, trying to process the complete implosion of our lives. Outside, Frank continued his frantic pacing, his voice carrying through the windows in increasingly desperate tones. We should pack, I said numbly. Whatever we can fit in the car. Jake nodded and headed toward the bedroom, but I remained frozen in place. The half-assembled nursery, the carefully chosen paint colors, the life we'd built here, all of it about to become evidence in a federal investigation. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is what happens when you mess with family. Hope you're satisfied. The message felt like ice in my veins. Frank was texting me threats while federal agents prepared to raid his property. The man had completely lost touch with reality. Jake returned with suitcases, his movements mechanical. I grabbed our important documents, some clothes. What about the nursery? I looked toward the baby's room, where boxes of tiny clothes and carefully chosen furniture waited for a daughter who would now be born into chaos. Leave it. We can't take furniture anyway. As we loaded our car with the remnants of our life, Frank's pacing grew more erratic. His phone calls had devolved into angry shouting, fragments of which carried across the yard. This is harassment, and 20 years I've been a taxpayer. Should we tell him we're leaving? Jake asked, closing the trunk. Before I could answer, Frank's voice rose to a roar. I don't care what it costs. Fix this. He hurled his phone across the lawn, where it shattered against the sidewalk. Then he turned toward us, his face contorted with rage. This is your fault, he screamed, storming across the yard. All of it. I hope you're happy. Jake stepped protectively in front of me. Dad, calm down. Calm down? Frank's laugh was unhinged. Federal agents are coming for me because your wife couldn't mind her own business. Because you committed fraud, I shot back from behind Jake. Frank's eyes went wild, and I realized with growing alarm that he was having some kind of breakdown. Right there on the lawn, at 1 a.m, my father-in-law was completely losing his mind. Frank stood there breathing hard, his chest heaving like he'd run a marathon. In the streetlight, I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and something about his posture made every instinct scream danger. Dad, Jake said carefully, you need to go home. Get some sleep. We can figure this out. Figure it out? Frank's voice cracked on the words. How exactly do we figure out federal agents? How do we figure out my life being destroyed? A light flickered on in the neighbor's window across the street. Mrs. Chen's face appeared briefly before the curtain fell back into place. Great. Now we were providing late-night entertainment for the whole neighborhood. Frank, please, I said, trying to keep my voice level. We're all upset, but screaming in the street isn't going to help anyone. Don't. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Don't you dare tell me what will help. You started this war, and now you get to live with the consequences. The word war sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just anger anymore, this was something darker. Something that felt genuinely threatening. We're leaving now, Jake said firmly, opening my car door. Whatever happens tomorrow, we won't be here for it. Frank watched us with hollow eyes as I lowered myself awkwardly into the passenger seat. The baby was pressing against my ribs again, responding to my stress with increasingly vigorous movements that bordered on painful. You know what the worst part is? Frank called out as Jake walked around to the driver's side. I actually liked you. Both of you. I thought you were family. Jake paused with his hand on the door handle. We were family. Until you chose money over our safety. Safety. Frank spat the word like it tasted bitter. You lived here for 2 years. 2 years without a single problem. But the moment I need the property back for legitimate business purposes, suddenly everything's a safety hazard. The wiring was always dangerous, I said through my open window. The inspector said that electrical box could have started a fire any night for years. Frank's face contorted. Could have. But it didn't, did it? You're alive, the house is still standing, but somehow I'm the villain here. A second neighbor's light came on, then a third. Frank's voice was carrying across the entire block, and apparently people were starting to lose patience with our family drama. The agents will be here in 5 hours, Jake said quietly. Where are you going to go? For the first time since his breakdown started, Frank looked uncertain. This is my house. I'm not going anywhere. Dad, you can't be here when they arrive. They'll arrest you. For what? Living in my own home? Jake rubbed his forehead, and I could see the exhaustion weighing on him. For obstruction of justice. For interfering with a federal investigation. For being belligerent and uncooperative while they execute a search warrant. Frank's bravado flickered. They can't just. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, I muttered under my breath. The comment was meant to be inaudible, but Frank's head snapped toward me like a predator tracking prey. What did you say? Jake shot me a warning look. Nothing, Dad. She didn't say anything. No, she said something about remaining silent. Frank took a step closer to the car, and his proximity made my skin crawl. You think this is funny? You think destroying a family is some kind of joke? I think, I said, meeting his eyes directly, that you destroyed your own family the moment you decided to put profit over people. Frank's face went purple. He raised his hand, and for one terrifying moment I thought he might actually reach through the window and hit me. Jake was out of the car in seconds, moving faster than I'd ever seen him. Touch her and I'll put you on the ground. Father and son faced off across 3 feet of space, both breathing hard, both looking like they'd reached some kind of breaking point. In the distance, I heard the sound of a siren. Someone had apparently decided our family meltdown warranted police intervention. Frank heard it too. His head tilted toward the sound, and something shifted in his expression. Perfect, he said, his voice suddenly eerily calm. Just perfect. The police cruiser rounded the corner with its lights flashing but no siren, painting our domestic disaster in alternating red and blue. Frank straightened his shoulders and smoothed down his hair, suddenly transforming from unhinged landlord to concerned citizen. Officers, he called out, waving as 2 cops emerged from the vehicle. Thank goodness you're here. I'm having trouble with some tenants who won't vacate my property. My stomach dropped. Jake's jaw clenched so hard I could hear his teeth grinding. The older officer, a woman with graying hair and tired eyes, approached slowly. Evening, folks. We got a call about a disturbance. What's the situation here? These people, Frank gestured dramatically at us, are refusing to leave my rental property. They've been served proper eviction notice, but now they're making threats and causing a scene. That's not, Jake started. Sir, the younger officer held up a hand, let's hear from everyone. You folks want to step out of the car? I exchanged a panicked look with Jake. Getting out of the car felt like walking into a trap, but refusing would only make us look guilty of something. Jake helped me out, his hand steady on my elbow despite the tremor I could feel running through him. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly vicious kick to my bladder, making me wince visibly. Ma'am, how far along are you? The female officer asked, her tone softening. 32 weeks, I said, one hand automatically moving to my belly. Frank jumped in before I could say anything else. Officers, I've been more than patient with them. Below market rent for 2 years, never raised it once. But I have family moving in, so I gave them proper notice. Instead of cooperating, they called the city to harass me with false complaints. False complaints? The words came out sharper than I intended. The male officer's eyes narrowed. What kind of complaints? Housing code violations, I said quickly. An inspector came today and found serious safety hazards. Electrical problems that could have killed us. Frank waved dismissively. Minor maintenance issues blown completely out of proportion. These city inspectors, you know how they are, they have to justify their salaries somehow. The female officer was writing in her notebook. So there was an official inspection today? Yes, Jake said. The property is being condemned. We have 72 hours to evacuate. Which is why I need them out tonight, Frank added smoothly. Can't have people living in condemned property, right? Liability issues. I stared at him in amazement. The man was actually trying to use the condemnation, caused by his own negligence, as justification for throwing us out illegally. Do you have the inspection report? The older officer asked. Jake pulled the papers from his jacket pocket. As the officers examined them, their expressions grew increasingly serious. Mr. Rodriguez, the female officer looked up at Frank. According to this, your property has never been properly permitted for rental use. Frank's composure cracked slightly. That's a paperwork issue. You know how the city is with bureaucracy. It says here there are federal agents scheduled to execute a search warrant at 6 a.m. The male officer's tone had shifted completely. In connection with unreported income and tenant endangerment. Frank went pale. I don't know anything about that. Sir, are you aware that interfering with tenants' rights can result in criminal charges? The female officer asked. I'm not interfering with anything. Frank's voice rose again. This is my property. Actually, the male officer said, looking at the inspection report, once a property is condemned, normal eviction procedures are suspended. These folks have 72 hours regardless of any previous notices. Frank's mouth opened and closed like a fish. His carefully constructed victim narrative was crumbling in real time. But they're trespassing, he protested weakly. No sir, they're not. The female officer closed her notebook. They're legal tenants with documentation and a court-ordered grace period. You, however, are harassing them in violation of tenant protection laws. The baby kicked again, and I gasped involuntarily. Both officers immediately focused on me. Ma'am, do you need medical attention? I'm okay, I said, though the stress was definitely taking its toll. We just need to find somewhere to stay until morning. Frank made one last desperate attempt. Officers, you don't understand. These people have cost me thousands of dollars in repairs, gotten the federal government involved in my private business. Sir, the male officer cut him off. I'm going to need you to step back and calm down. But Frank wasn't done. His desperation was morphing into something uglier, something that made the hair on my neck stand up. This is still America, isn't it? A man should be able to do what he wants with his own property. The officer's radio crackled to life, cutting through Frank's rant about property rights. A dispatcher's voice filled the night air. Unit 47, be advised we have additional information on your location. Federal agents requesting local support for morning operation. Frank went rigid. What does that mean? The female officer exchanged a meaningful look with her partner before responding. Sir, it means you need to contact an attorney. Tonight. But I haven't done anything wrong. Frank's voice pitched higher, desperation bleeding through his false confidence. Running rental property isn't illegal. Operating unpermitted rentals and failing to report income to the IRS is very illegal, the male officer replied flatly. As is threatening pregnant tenants. I felt a wave of vindication, but it was immediately overshadowed by a sharp pain in my lower back. The stress, the standing, the late hour, everything was catching up with me at once. Jake, I whispered, grabbing his arm. I need to sit down. He immediately guided me back toward the car, but Frank's voice stopped us cold. Oh, now she's having pregnancy problems? How convenient. His tone dripped with sarcasm. Suddenly needs medical attention the moment things don't go her way. The female officer's expression hardened. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to step back. This is my property. Frank exploded, throwing his arms wide. My house, my lawn, my driveway. I should be able to say whatever I want. That's when I noticed the new set of headlights turning onto our street. Then another. And another. 3 black SUVs moving slowly, deliberately, like sharks circling prey. Oh shit, the male officer muttered, reaching for his radio. Frank followed our collective gaze toward the approaching vehicles, and the color drained from his face completely. It's not 6 a.m. yet. They said 6 a.m. Plans change, the female officer said grimly, already stepping toward her patrol car. Especially when subjects are flagged as flight risks. The SUVs parked in perfect formation, blocking both ends of the street. Men and women in dark windbreakers emerged, their movements coordinated and professional. Even in the dim streetlight, I could make out the bright yellow letters, FBI. Federal agents, Jake breathed, his arm tightening around me. Frank stood frozen on his own lawn, watching his world collapse in real time. The confident, angry man who'd been threatening us moments ago had vanished, replaced by someone who looked small and scared and utterly defeated. Franklin Rodriguez? A tall woman with short gray hair approached, badge visible on her belt. I'm Agent Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with you. It's not 6 a.m., Frank said weakly, as if the timing was his biggest problem. We moved up our timeline based on reports of confrontational behavior, Agent Martinez replied smoothly. Sir, I need you to step away from these folks and come speak with us privately. Frank looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route or a friendly face. His gaze landed on Jake, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret flicker across his features. Son, he said quietly, this isn't how I wanted things to go. Jake's jaw was tight, but his voice remained steady. Dad, just cooperate with them. Don't make this worse than it already is. Agent Martinez gestured toward one of the SUVs. Mr. Rodriguez, we can do this easy or hard. Your choice. As Frank shuffled toward the federal agents, shoulders slumped in defeat, I realized we were witnessing more than just an arrest. We were watching the complete destruction of Jake's family, the final collapse of relationships that could never be repaired. The baby kicked hard against my ribs, as if she too could sense that everything was about to change forever. The baby chose that moment to make her entrance into the world, not with a gentle announcement, but with a violent contraction that dropped me to my knees on Frank's driveway. Jake. I gasped, clutching my belly as warm fluid gushed down my legs. The baby's coming. Suddenly, our family drama became secondary to the very real medical emergency unfolding on the asphalt. Agent Martinez was at my side in seconds, her professional demeanor shifting to something almost maternal. How far apart are the contractions, she asked, helping Jake support my weight. That was the first one, I panted. But my water just broke. The female police officer was already calling for an ambulance while Jake frantically tried to time contractions that were coming fast, too fast. In the chaos, Frank stood forgotten beside the FBI vehicle, watching his granddaughter's dramatic entrance with something like awe on his face. We need to get her to the hospital now, the paramedic said as the ambulance arrived. This baby isn't waiting for anyone. As they loaded me onto the stretcher, I caught sight of Frank one last time. The federal agents had stepped back respectfully, giving our family medical emergency priority over their investigation. Frank looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his choices. Take care of her, he called out to Jake, his voice breaking. Take care of them both. 6 hours later, I held my daughter in my arms in a sterile hospital room while Jake dozed in the chair beside me. She was perfect, tiny fingers, button nose, and lungs that had announced her arrival to half the neighborhood. We'd named her Sophia, which meant wisdom. She'd certainly chosen a wise time to make her dramatic entrance. A soft knock interrupted my quiet bonding time. Carol Mendez stood in the doorway, looking tired but smiling. I hope I'm not intruding, she said. I heard about the early arrival and wanted to check on you. Come in, I said, adjusting Sophia's blanket. Any news about the house? Carol's expression grew serious. The property has been officially condemned and sealed. Your father-in-law is cooperating with federal investigators. She paused. There's something else. We found evidence of 3 other unpermitted rental properties. He's been running an entire illegal operation for years. I felt a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. Frank's greed had been far more extensive than we'd ever imagined. What happens to us now? Jake asked, finally waking up. Well, Carol smiled, there's good news. The city has an emergency housing program for displaced families, especially those with newborns. It's not permanent, but it'll give you time to find something stable. She pulled out a folder. And there's been an unexpected development. The other tenants from Mr. Rodriguez's illegal properties are filing a class action lawsuit. Given your cooperation with the investigation, there's likely to be compensation. 3 months later, we were settled in a small but legal apartment across town, with proper electrical wiring and a landlord who actually returned phone calls. Sophia had grown into a happy, healthy baby who slept peacefully in her properly ventilated, code-compliant nursery. Jake's relationship with his father remained fractured, though they'd started having brief phone conversations. Frank was facing federal charges but had avoided jail time in exchange for full cooperation and restitution to his victims. He'd lost both his house and his illegal income, but he'd gained something unexpected, perspective. She's beautiful, he'd whispered during his one supervised visit to meet his granddaughter. I'm sorry it took almost losing everything to remember what really matters. As I sat in our safe, legal home watching Sophia sleep, I reflected on the price of justice. Sometimes doing the right thing destroys relationships, burns bridges, and forces everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. But as my daughter breathed easily in her proper nursery, I knew I'd make the same choice again. Family loyalty has its limits. Safety doesn't.